Pam Bondi thought she was walking into a routine session. What she didn't know was that Jasmine Crockett had the emails, the timestamps, the signed letters, and a plan to bring every contradiction into the light in front of the nation. It was supposed to be just another oversight session. No chaos, no fireworks, just suits, microphones, and the usual scripted dance of testimony. But the mood inside the hearing room on Capitol Hill that Tuesday morning didn't feel ordinary. Jasmine Crockett sat quietly, at the end of the committee table posture, still eyes fixed, pen in hand. She didn't flip through her notes like the others. She didn't sip coffee, she just watched former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, seated 2 rows down, testifying under oath. Her voice was steady. She'd been here before. She knew how to handle pressure, or at least she thought she did. I've had no direct communication with Westbridge Strategies or its affiliates in the last 12 months, Bondi said, eyes calmly scanning the faces in front of her. A few heads nodded. The chairman scribbled something on a yellow notepad. One representative whispered to another. The kind of movements you'd expect when people thought the hearing was on autopilot, but not Jasmine. She blinked, slowly, like she was counting in her head. 5 seconds passed, then 10. She leaned into her mic. Miss Bondi, Jasmine began, voice low, but direct. Could you repeat that last statement for the record? Pam turned slightly toward her, wearing the kind of polite smile people reserve for kids asking too many questions. Certainly, she said, repeating her denial word for word. Jasmine clicked her pen once. Then she said nothing, just stared at her for a beat too long. Pam shifted, a subtle change, but anyone watching closely could feel it. Her body adjusted in the chair. She lifted her chin as if she suddenly needed air. That's when the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The clerk at the side table coughed. One of the press photographers adjusted their lens. It wasn't loud, but the atmosphere had changed, like something had been let in and no one quite knew what to do with it. Yet Jasmine's voice cut through again. Firmer this time, you're aware that Westbridge Strategies is currently under federal investigation for illegal lobbying tied to the Ellington environmental contract in Oregon. Pam hesitated, then nodded. Once I've read the reports, yes, and you're sure, Jasmine continued, her tone neutral but pressing, that you haven't communicated with anyone from that firm, email, phone, in person since last October. Pam crossed her legs, slowly adjusting her suit jacket. That's correct. Another pause. Jasmine glanced briefly down at the folder in front of her. It was slim, almost unimpressive in size. Just a manila folder, with a single blue post. It stuck to the edge. No theatrics, no flourish. She opened it. What happened next wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with gasps or shouting. It came quietly in Jasmine's voice as she read out loud. March 18th, 9:47. I'm Hi Pam, just looping back with the revised talking points. Let us know if you're still comfortable pushing this at your Thursday appearance. Jeff, Westbridge Strategies. Pam's lips parted slightly. Her jaw stiffened, but she didn't speak. Jasmine looked up. Do you recognize this email? No answer. The room had shifted again. No one was flipping through papers anymore. Staffer stared, cameras locked on. Jasmine held up a printout for the record. There's more, but before I continued, you still stand by your sworn testimony that you've had no contact with this firm. Silence. Pam opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She glanced at the chairman as if hoping for a lifeline. There wasn't one. Too, I'd need to check my records, she said finally, her voice cracking slightly. Jasmine didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply placed the document face up on the table. The timestamp is from a Westbridge domain. The address is tied directly to Jeff Raoul, lead consultant. You replied 12 minutes later with quote looks. Good. I'll run it by Brian and confirm. Pam looked down at the table. Her fingers curled into her palm. Someone in the back of the room let out a breath. They didn't realize they were holding. But Jasmine wasn't finished. The room was only beginning to understand what was coming next. Pam tried to recover. She cleared her throat, adjusted the mic, and offered the kind of answer politicians lean on when they're cornered. Representative Crockett. I received dozens of emails each day, many from unsolicited sources. It's entirely possible that something was sent without my acknowledgement or review. I'd have to see the full thread to understand the context. That's when Jasmine tilted her head slightly and gave the faintest nod, not of agreement, but of recognition. She had heard this kind of dance before. She leaned back just a little, folding her hands. Context is important, Jasmine replied coolly, so let's make sure we get all of it. Pam gave a short laugh. The kind that isn't really about humor. A smirk crept in a flicker of that old confidence, respectfully representative. This feels more like a cross-examination than an oversight hearing. A few soft chuckles fluttered from the gallery. Jasmine didn't flinch respectfully. Miss Bondi, she said, when someone gives sworn testimony before a congressional committee and that testimony doesn't match documented communication, that's not a feeling, that's a problem. Pam's expression tightened. The smirk vanished. Jasmine reached for the second documenter. Nails tapped lightly against the tabletop as she held it up. April 6th. Subject line, urgent coordination, Governor's Office, talking points. Sender Westbridge, CC'd to you and 2 staff members from your private consulting firm. Care to explain what kind of coordination? That was Pam opened her mouth to speak, but Jasmine continued without giving her the space. You replied with a PDF and attachment, and the metadata confirms your device sent it. The committee room shifted again. Eyes widened. Let me be clear, Jasmine said, this isn't about your memory. This is about accountability. You sat in that chair and denied contact. Now we have timestamps, IP logs, and chain correspondence showing not just contact, but active participation. Pam reached for her water bottle. Her hand trembled just slightly. The chairman leaned toward his mic. Miss Bondi, would you like to respond before we move forward? Pam inhaled slowly. There may have been staff-level interactions. I wasn't directly involved in all correspondence. Sometimes my name gets included. That's not what the message says. Jasmine interrupted. Her tone wasn't angry, it was surgical. It says, quote, Pam approved this version. Moving forward with her draft, the room went completely quiet. Jasmine's voice softened, but her words hit harder. You were not just looped in, you were leading it. There was no smirk. Now Pam stared at the folder on the table, like it might burst into flames. Then came a voice from another. Committee member Madam Chair, we may need to review the full thread of documents before allowing this line of questioning to continue. But Jasmine didn't take the bait. She calmly said, happy to submit every page into the record, but the public deserves answers in real time, not behind closed doors. It wasn't grandstanding, it was clarity. Jasmine wasn't there to score points. She was there to peel back the layers. Pam tried to pivot. If you're implying that I've misled this committee, I'd advise caution. I served my state with distinction. You're not being accused of dishonor. Miss Bondi. Jasmine interrupted this time with a steel edge in her voice. You're being asked to explain why your version of the truth keeps collapsing under evidence that hit. Pam's eyes darted across the room, looking for anyone to interrupt, to change the subject, to give her a moment to think, but no one stepped in behind her. 2 of her aides whispered urgently. One of them began thumbing through a file too late. And across the internet, though they didn't know it yet, clips from the exchange were already being posted by journalists in the room. A moment earlier, Bondi had looked like someone who'd been here before, a veteran. Now she looked like someone realizing the rules had changed and she wasn't ready, but the most damning piece, the one that would make headlines, hadn't even been read yet. Jasmine still had 1 page left. Jasmine didn't rush. She let the weight of the silence settle before reaching for the final document. It wasn't thick, just 2 printed pages stapled at the top. The kind of paper that wouldn't look important unless you knew what it meant. She tapped her pen once on the margin and looked across the table. This one's dated May 2nd, 7:31 p.m. She said subject line briefing packet for Bondi's media, run-approved talking points and cover letter sent from Brett Samuels at Westbridge attached were 4 items. One of them, a cover letter from you to Representative Hauser of Oregon, was signed electronically using the same DocuSign ID tied to your personal consulting account. Pam blinked hard. Her voice was barely audible. That wasn't part of my official work, but you signed it, and you submitted it to his office 2 days. Later, Jasmine's tone didn't waver. The timestamp on your email and the timestamp on the congressional inbox matched down to the minute. Pam opened her mouth, then shut it again. Jasmine picked up the second page, holding it between 2 fingers like she was placing evidence on a crime board. There's a handwritten note scanned and attached. She said in the margin of the draft it reads, quote, "Make sure Crockett never sees this," and it's underlined twice. A wave of disbelief moved across the room. Small sounds shifting chairs, murmurs too low to catch but unmistakable in tone. Pam's eyes locked on the paper face draining of color. The chairman shifted in his seat, but said nothing. Jasmine wasn't finished. "You don't remember sending that signing? That reading that note?" Pam's voice cracked. I don't recall. You don't recall telling your own staff to hide material from a sitting member of Congress who was actively part of the oversight subcommittee involved. In this case, I never said that. Jasmine leaned forward. Your initials are next to the note. That silence returned, the one that doesn't beg for a response, because everyone already knows the answer. "Would you like to amend your statement?" Jasmine asked. Still calm, Pam let her hands fall into her lap. She didn't answer. Jasmine glanced toward the chairman for the record. "We now have 3 separate pieces of communication indicating a pattern of misrepresentation. 1 denial of contact with Westbridge, 2 coordinated talking points submitted under Ms. Bondi's name, and 3, a direct instruction to obscure materials relevant to congressional review." The chairman gave a slow, reluctant nod. "All documents will be entered into the record." Jasmine folded the pages and placed them neatly back in the folder. Pam still hadn't spoken. Her hand was resting flat against the table, palm down, like she was trying to ground herself. One of her aides reached forward to whisper something, but Pam raised her hand ever so slightly, just enough to say not. Now she looked toward Jasmine again, but there was no defense in her face anymore. Just fatigue. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't twist the knife. She just looked her in the eyes and said what needed to be said. Truth has a way of catching up even when people think it won't. Someone in the press row typed that out word for word. It would be quoted within the hour. Pam straightened in her chair and finally whispered, "I need a recess." The chairman hesitated, looking to legal counsel. The room waited. "Need a recess," she repeated louder this time. 5 minutes. There was no objection. The gavel tapped once. 5-minute recess. Granted. Pam stood slowly, as if even gravity had turned against her. She walked out, heels clicking down the hall. The cameras followed. The moment was no longer just inside that room. It was everywhere behind her. Jasmine sat back in her chair and exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. She didn't look triumphant. She looked focused, like someone who knew this wasn't over. Yet, but outside that hearing room, the story had already exploded and the digital world was moving faster than anyone inside realized. When Pam Bondi stepped out into the hallway, she didn't speak to the press, no statement, no eye contact. She moved, quickly flanked by 2 staffers, eyes down, lips pressed tight. A security officer gently guided the crowd of reporters back as they shouted questions into the void. She left behind. Inside the hearing room remained still. No one resumed side conversations. Phones were down even. The usual clatter of keyboards paused. Jasmine Crockett sat quietly again, almost as she had before. It all started, calm, poised, the folder of evidence now closed, resting just beside her elbow. The chairman leaned toward the microphone. "We'll resume once the witness returns. I advise all members to remain present," but no one moved anyway. Representative Glenn Valerio, seated 2 chairs to Jasmine's right, turned to her with a low whisper. "Did you know about the DocuSign attachment?" Before this morning, Jasmine kept her gaze forward, got a confirmation at 8:00 a.m. He let out a slow breath that explains the folder. She looked at him. "It's not about folders, it's about telling the truth. When people think no one's looking." Valerio nodded, slightly, but didn't reply across the room. Carla Nunes, a political correspondent for the Des Moines Standard, reviewed her live tweet thread. She had written over a dozen posts in the past 20 minutes, each one more shared than the last. But one tweet, just 10 words long, was already blowing up. "Make sure Crockett never sees this." Pam Bondi's margin note retweeted over 0 times in less than an hour. Commenters were tagging news anchors, legal analysts, politicians, even Crockett herself. The online world was locked in, but Jasmine hadn't looked at her phone once. She was watching the door. 5 minutes passed, then 8 still. "No. Bondi." The tension in the room didn't lift. If anything, it thickened. Finally, one of the aides re-entered and whispered something to the chairman. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and tapped the gavel. "The committee has received a request from Miss Bondi's counsel to delay testimony until counsel can review the new evidence." A murmur swept across the room. Jasmine spoke before anyone else could. "Mr. Chairman, this committee was under the impression that Miss Bondi had prepared thoroughly for this hearing. These communications weren't hidden. They existed in open channels. It is not the responsibility of this committee to wait for someone to check their inbox." The chairman nodded, though his face betrayed tension. "I agree in principle. Representative, however, legal procedure requires." "Understood," Jasmine said, interrupting him. "But let the record reflect the moment the truth came out." She ran. There was a beat of silence. Then someone clapped. One single clap before a hush fell again. No, one looked to see who started it, but the message landed. The chairman, clearly uneasy, cleared his.